What's up, fellow tech geeks? Caleb from IT Provisor here, and today I've got another unboxing slash first impressions video of, drumroll please, the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, it doesn't look too different, at least as far as the box and what it looks like from the front is concerned, compared to the iPhone 13 Pro Max, which I myself am personally upgrading from last year's model. However, the whole point of this video is to give a first impression, show what it looks like, talk about its main features, and see whether or not it's worth keeping or upgrading to from last year's iPhone 13 Pro Max model, which my hope as well is that you guys too can get the same information and make an informed decision, especially if you're coming from an older model than what I'm coming from. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is flip this over here, and let's go ahead and pull these tabs, the traditional Apple tabs. Bottom, get the top here next, and then flip it back over, and let's slide it open. And look at that right there. Already notice the camera bumps. Definitely a bigger, not only just a little bit bigger, but bigger overall than last year's iPhone camera. Pull that off right there. Honestly, there's not too much, like I said before, to have that's different from last year's iPhone 13 Pro Max. I believe that they actually made this button a little bit lower, and I can actually show a video a little later of the difference between the models as far as the side buttons are concerned. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same model as far as that's concerned. So let me just pop that right there for right now. And then they still give you a Lightning, which, again, rumor has it, next year, Apple is switching over from Lightning to USB-C. So that's actually a good step in the right direction, rumor has it. And then, let's see here, get a nice little pamphlet. Oh, got the sticker, so that's cool. So you'd be surprised, not every single Apple product comes with a sticker, regulatory stuff. And then, oh, check this out. You no longer need a physical SIM card. You just need to activate your eSIM during iPhone setup, which in my case, with this iPhone, being a Verizon customer, all I'm going to do is turn it on, activate it, and put it as just switch over the phone. Now, when you order yours online, assuming you order yours, you're going to have a prompt to, at least from Apple's website, to put in your information in case you want to have your phone number be transferred over to your new iPhone. So I'll find out after activating it myself, seeing how it looks, and let you know how that process went. But from past experience, actually, when I first started doing this eSIM, when Apple first started offering it, I just basically called Verizon and said, hey, add eSIM to activate the eSIM and get rid of the SIM card. And ever since I did my first iPhone with that, the other ones have been just pretty easy, actually. It's just the very first time when you're taking your phone number and putting onto eSIM, it's a little bit of a pain. So depending on where you're coming from, your mileage may vary. So yeah, I'm going to start this up, set it up, and let you know how it goes. And then we can start looking at it a little more in depth. I've had a chance to set everything up and test it out a little bit as well, just to kind of get a feel for how this iPhone varies versus my old one, the iPhone 13 Pro Max. And it's cool. I mean, if I tap this to open, actually, if I don't let it lock, you'll notice right away, always on display. And kind of funny too, maybe it's just the HDR effect of the iPhone that I'm recording with this camera, but it looks brighter on the screen than it actually is in real life when you look at it with your naked eye. It's definitely, especially if you don't have a black background. I've seen some people, some other YouTubers as well, reviewers, saying that the battery does probably drain a little more because of the OLED colors being lit up versus black with all the pixels being off except for the text here but I think it's a very minimal, I think only like maybe a couple percentage point difference. So that's not a big deal, but regardless, if you have a colored background like this, you're going to notice it more readily, especially if you're in a dark environment versus just having black. I'm definitely getting used to still having, I mean, coming from the very first iPhone all the way up until the 13 Pro Max, the iPhone's never had an always on display. So getting used to that with this iPhone, it takes a little bit of time, but I'm getting used to it and I actually like it. It's pretty cool, especially with these complications, I guess you can call them, or these widgets right here. Information that you can have at a glance on here is really nice and actually useful. And even though I don't have any notifications right this second, it's cool to also see a list of notifications that you can basically scroll up with and show by group notifications, like per app, what you have and all that stuff. So that's actually pretty nice without having to even turn on your screen. Now, the next notice right here, or the next change that you probably would notice right here is the dynamic island. See, now it showed it there, lock. So this dynamic island right here basically expands, contracts, it kind of adjusts or adapts to whatever you're doing with your phone. So it's kind of like the new and improved notification center, because from the old iPhone, you'd have in the top corners here different information that would display, including a dot for like recording or using your voice or whatever. Here, it actually gets use out of that otherwise empty, useless space, just having the camera and the Face ID sensor, all that stuff cut out. So that's definitely cool and definitely a nice little welcome change. There you go. So now I had a notification come in here. So if I have it off, boom, you'll notice right there, it'll be there for you to take a look at once you are in front of your phone and want to take a look at that. So that's actually a cool little change there. Other notable things here. Well, as I mentioned when I first unboxed this, it's basically the same. I mean, I don't really notice much of a difference between the iPhone 13 Pro Max and 14 as far as visuals are concerned. You still have the easy to see fingerprint finish of the stainless steel. It has the same lightning connector, which I know that's going to change at some point, whether next year or by 2024. So the volume buttons, all that stuff's exactly the same all around. One cool little thing, actually, again, I'll show a comparison when I can take my phone off here and show it off the other camera, but this button right here is a little bit lower for when you hold it. So if I hold it normally like this, it kind of fits into my thumb a little better, whereas my 13 Pro Max, I had to go a little bit higher, just a little bit. It's offset just ever so slightly, but again, small things like that are definitely a nice touch. So, and also one thing that I can't show on camera is something that you have to actually experience, especially coming from an older iPhone model, is the weight. I've noticed that, well, actually you'll notice right here off the side, I believe it is off this side, there's no more SIM card tray here. It's gone. So Apple is moving over to all eSIM as of this generation. And because it's gone, in this area right here, where it would normally be underneath the hood, that SIM card tray area is gone. So it's just empty space, which actually has two nice things going for it. Number one, again, the weight. When you're holding this, it's nice, it's lighter. And number two, thermals. So I don't have a FLIR camera or any of those thermal heating imaging cameras, but because the battery and the processing, all that stuff takes place basically up here, if I'm not mistaken, that heat is hottest in this area and it dissipates with the bigger chassis like this, which is why too you have typically a little bit better performance with the Max models versus the regular models, simply because it can dissipate heat better. That's just basically thermodynamics. With those two things, that makes this model a little bit better as far as that's concerned. Also too, Another really cool thing about this phone is, again, that 1 hertz screen that makes this possible. Having the standby, having the always on display, which I personally want to leave on, especially since the battery drainage is not a huge difference. But another cool thing about the 1 hertz refresh rate, which makes this possible with this phone, is that it saves battery whenever you're doing anything else because of that adaptive refresh rate. That's what made the iPhone 13 Pro such an awesome device for battery in the first place, is because that was the first model that introduced Pro Motion, which of course is here on the newest flagship model. And that Pro Motion screen, not only does it adapt to refresh rates as far as what you're doing, whether it's video or scrolling the web or what have you, but that also translates to better battery life overall because it can adapt even lower refresh rates. So another feature that, according to some reviewers, say is not being talked about nearly enough are the iPhone 14 Pro and Pro Max's speakers. According to some, they say that it sounds even better, louder, clearer, overall just a better experience than the iPhone 13 Pro and Pro Max even. So since I actually have my 13 Pro Max here, I'm going to compare it to my 14 Pro Max by listening to a soundtrack side by side, comparing them in different shots, and seeing which one sounds better. If you guys can hear the difference as well, put it down in the comments. So without further ado, let's listen. Wow, I gotta say, I'm actually surprised, pleasantly surprised, that the 14 Pro Max sounded louder and even clearer than the 13 Pro Max. Now, I think one of the reasons might be, if I look at my 13 Pro Max here, and I'll show a close-up in another shot, but it has kind of like it's not so much a really slim, but more of a shorter slash thicker cutout in the top, versus the 14 Pro Max having more of a longer, narrower cutout in the top for that speaker. So maybe it has something to do with that. Not sure, but props to Apple because they actually made it sound really good compared to the 13 Pro Max. Something that I wasn't expecting, but the reviewers got it right. I have to say, props to them. Alright, so it's been over 6 whole weeks since I first started using this iPhone 14 Pro Max. It took a little longer than I wanted it to be, but life and building up my own business, IT Provisor, itprovisor.com, took up some of the time. But that's actually not a bad thing because I was able to use this more and put it through its paces, test it out more thoroughly, which means I can give a better review to you, lovely viewers out there. So let's focus on the main reason as to why I personally upgraded to this iPhone 14 Pro Max over the 13 Pro Max, the camera. Specifically, the main camera with this whopping 4 times greater resolution, 48 megapixel sensor. From the iPhone 11 Pro Max all the way up to the 13 Pro Max, 12 was the max. But this time, you're getting 4 times as much resolution, which basically equates to much better cropping and much higher quality photos overall. For example, if you took a landscape shot and you had, say, a horizon that had something in the distance that you wanted to focus on, well, you can actually zoom in on that and still retain much of the quality as if it were zoomed out all the way. Trying to do that on the older iPhone, even the 13 Pro Max, will give you not as good a result. So that's definitely a huge improvement. As a matter of fact, that is the biggest, technically speaking, improvement over the 13 Pro Max and even prior generations up to the 11 Pro Max from back a few years ago. So that's pretty awesome as well. The video as well is really good quality, very close, similar to the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but I'd say just a little bit better, especially at nighttime, which actually I managed to get a good test with the nighttime on this camera from a few weeks ago when a thunderstorm came through and gave me a nice light show, which I took some video to see here. Good performance overall, very nice. I can still see things pretty well, even in dim lighting and stuff. Let's not forget too, when you have really good lighting from daytime lighting or indoor lighting from that well-lit area, it looks amazing as well. I'd say about on par from the iPhone 13 Pro Max, but still really good. And actually, fun fact, right now, I'm recording my iPhone 14 Pro Max. I'm also not wearing my normal AirPod or speaking in front of a microphone because I wanted to test and showcase of how actually pretty good I think this iPhone's front-facing and also rear-facing microphones are for their respective cameras. So another thing I touched upon as well that I wanted to mention here too from my original hands-on impressions is the always-on display. I've seen some people compare the always-on display to prior models, especially the iPhone 13 Pro Max, the benchmark to compare this iPhone 14 Pro Max to, as being not as good when you have the always-on display on. And, well, of course, it's on all the time, at least by default. So it's going to use up some extra battery. However, there's a little hack I did that if you take your iPhone, flip it over, and put it on top of the desk or wherever you have it, or in your pocket, whatever, it will turn off the screen. So basically you're saving battery power that way. And honestly, when you do that, it's pretty much on par with my iPhone 13 Pro Max, which already had a beast of a battery. Now Apple mentioned that you have up to 29 hours with video playback and I think up to 96 hours with audio streaming. But how is it with everyday usage? Well, for me, doing a little bit of streaming, looking online, browsing, doing Discord or other messaging apps for actually sometimes a little bit too long of a time in between, I gotta say, it's held up pretty well. The battery barely has a dent in it, so that means Apple did a really good job with a slightly smaller battery having basically the same performance as its previous generation, which shows that Apple's prowess in their chips is doing really, really well with battery power. Past that, everything else about the iPhone in this case is not really too much different from the previous generation. That's not to say though that the improvements aren't there. Again, the dynamic island, that same about the same time of battery life, the photos, the camera, the overall look and feel of the iPhone, similar to past generations. But that's not a bad thing because the iPhone is the best in the business, at least according to me. But that's not to say it's bad because the iPhone, in my opinion, is the best in the industry, and this iPhone just basically implements on that and reiterates and does better. So definitely props for that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing because the iPhone array by itself from prior generations has been an awesome phone, and this one basically iterates in small bits a better improvement from the last generation. So continuing that tradition that Apple does every year of just making it a little bit better, a little bit faster, and just overall potentially a justifiable purchase. Which, speaking of which, after all is said and done, since there's not much else I can really say about this iPhone that I haven't really covered, is this iPhone worth upgrading to? Well, let's step back for a second. If you have an iPhone 13 Pro Max that you're contemplating about upgrading to, and say, like in my case, for example, you have the camera that you really use a lot every day for things like this video channel or photography or basically a reliable, great camera, it's actually a pretty good contender just because of that 48 megapixel main camera sensor. However, if you're looking at anything else, like let's just say, for example, you're going from that iPhone 13 Pro Max again, like I am. If you look at anything else, it's debatable because you have the always-on display. Cool, but at least for me, found kind of gimmicky, but still cool to have, being able to see your notifications without having to actually tap your screen on it, even though it took a little bit of getting used to. And also, too, it has the same form factor, has the same look and feel, nice, at least in my case, gold shine if you have the gold model. Same colors, except for that purple. That is a different actual physical change from the 13 Pro Max's. I believe it was like navy or Pacific blue. So, but overall, it's an iPhone. It's a great iPhone. And for me, honestly, I would say, unless you have the camera system, or you really want that always on display or that dynamic island, I would say save your money for next year, especially with the rumors of Apple going to Thunderbolt 4 from the Lightning connector. That's not to say that if you have an iPhone 12 Pro Max or older even, that is not a serious contender to upgrade to. Again, if you're upgrading every year like I do, it's iterative, but if you only upgrade every few years from an older model, say a 12 Pro Max or even 11 Pro Max, I would say just go for it. It's a great, awesome iPhone. It's going to last you a few years, so depending on how long you can get onto your phones for, typically. Again, thank you so much for your valuable, precious time spent with me. My aim is to try to deliver as much valuable content as I can with every upload, and hopefully this time I didn't disappoint. This is Kaleb IT Provisor. Keep geeking out. See you next time. Hey, you know what pairs with an iPhone? Literally? Apple Watch. And not just any Apple Watch, because Apple recently released a first of its kind Apple Watch Ultra. I wonder if you should upgrade to this Apple Watch Ultra. Well, wonder no more, because this video gives a hands-on and in-depth review about whether or not you should spend your hard-earned money on it. Go ahead, tap it, click it. I'll wait a few seconds. I'm not impatient or anything.